what I decided to do is I decided to kind of talk a little bit about my experiences in what has happened over the last couple of months, and kind of try to give a little bit of a perspective in that sense that that I'd like to kind of focus a bit on the things that that sort of have been accelerated through the pandemic. You know, kind of there are certain developments that we did expect to happen in the near future, but that really kind of got jump started by what is happening right now. So the changes that we currently are seeing in not only in kind of in the way we behave generally, but also in the way the economy behaves, are not something that is going to kind of revert itself to the way it was before. There are some actually much more structural things underneath, and there are a lot of things that will change very, very radically. And I'd like to kind of spend a little bit of time today to talk about these things, and kind of connecting to the talk that Matthias gave. Essentially, one of the things that, for example, that for me was very interesting is last year we implemented an esports. Oopsie, sorry. Last year we implemented an esports. Okay, so here we are. Last year we implemented an esports program, and because we didn't really want to have that in our college, we asked the business school to do that, and they did an esports management program. It's part of their sports management department. And what we didn't realize back then is that esports management program is actually now starting to overtake the entire sports management area. Because as you might expect, sports management is a field that's really struggling right now. It's completely unclear what's going to happen. So all the students that are interested in the field are actually kind of moving towards esports management. So what really has happened is sort of certain entire areas are shifting. And that kind of creates an issue for a university like ours that is really reliant on the fact that we have an on-campus education. Really, the campus is one of the things that's really critical for us in bringing students to our area. So it is really the added value that we can provide. So the question then becomes, is essentially how can we redefine what we're really doing in education, in game design education, in an area where there is a lot of social distancing going on, and where the things are really changing, and where entire educational structure is changing. These, by the way, are kind of images from our campus. They are a little bit dated because essentially they were taken at a time where we could still fly our drone right into the city of Philadelphia. We obviously can't do that anymore. But sort of it shows you where we are, and really kind of the location that's really critical to us. We are next to UPenn, in case you have ever been in that area, and it's sort of a vibrant area that we are. I need to provide a little bit of context of who we are and what we do. Our game design program is located in a arts and design college. And that's already very unusual, because usually what you will find is that most game design programs are somewhat connected to a computer science or communications program or things, but you're very rarely going to find them actually in an area that sort of is really arts and media kind of focused. And the emphasis of our college is really much on, kind of, if I would compare it, we have a lot of Austrians here. It's very similar to what we're doing is very similar to what the Angewandte is doing. So it's essentially almost like the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, in that we have a lot of different disciplines and really kind of look at everything from a design perspective. And that gives a completely different educational approach. So we have a very design-oriented educational approach that relies a lot on personal interaction from student to student, from student to faculty, where we work with masterclass systems almost. And that sort of is something that's really kind of important for us. I'd like to always kind of point one of my colleagues who kind of makes that point perfectly actually in her way. Geneviève Dion was a very well-respected Canadian fashion designer before she joined us, and at our university she started to look into the connection between fashion design and engineering, and became sort of a key contributor to many very, very large-scale NSF grants, where she's looking into advanced materials manufacturing. There are things like the mathematics of weaving patterns, or kind of how do you use the knowledge that has been kind of created in the fashion industry over centuries. How do you use that in order to kind of create folding materials for all kinds of things, and that sort of really kind of explains where we are and what we do. Now, in this department, we are the Department of Digital Media, and we also were founded and based on that very idea. We actually grew out of the film and television department around the time the original Toy Story movie came out. And the film and television people said, well, we need to somehow figure out how film and television really have an impact on that type of media. And they formed this digital media program that later became our digital media department. So we are now close to 25 years old. Which is fairly old in our field, and sort of kind of that really kind of brings in that history. Now, the type of things that we do are really not as traditional AAA game design as you would normally think. So essentially, we are really kind of looking and trying to expand on the way of thinking of what can you do with games, and what are the things that really go beyond the current state of art. A very good example is that we did at some point, we did a game on a skyscraper. So we played Tetris on a skyscraper. It's one of these things that kind of students had a lot of fun to actually do. Apparently it was covered with the main news media in China, and we got like 1 billion viewers or things like that. But sort of it kind of really shows of the thing, essentially kind of how we are set up. A couple of key facts. We are very fairly small. We have about 400 students, about 15 faculty members, so it's not that particularly big, and a couple of different undergraduate and graduate programs. And the one thing that I just wanted to point out is that it's also something that's very unusual for us is sort of we have a co-op system, meaning that the students go on internships. They have to go on 3 6-month internships, so they spend an entirety of 5 years in our programs, and out of these 5 years, 1.5 years they actually work with companies, and ideally those are game development and game design companies, but there can be really anything. And that is actually one of the challenges that we are facing right now in terms of the how do we actually kind of deal with a co-based system in an environment where social distancing is becoming a norm. But I'm going to kind of touch on that a little bit later. I don't want to really show off, but I just wanted to give you sort of an idea of kind of the ranking that we have, so that you know, essentially when we went into the COVID pandemic, one of the things that was immediately clear to me is that we essentially cannot cancel anything. So we decided to not even use the term cancel. So essentially what we did is we just flipped the entire department within a couple of days from a pure face-to-face mode into a high-flex mode, really, which later became a full online mode. And in doing so, we needed to be very careful to not kind of influence any of the accomplishments that they had. We had many students working on very high-end, high-skill projects, and we needed to make sure that we kind of maintained that sort of status and ranking. Just to give you some idea on the type of projects our students are doing, this was one of the capstone projects from last year.
Hey, I'm Ben. I'm Ryan. I'm Andre.
That is actually one of the things which kind of usually flips people off a little. We are very diverse. We are a very diverse program, but for some reason, some of our most successful games have been created by all boys groups, which is rather unusual. But sort of that's also one of the things that for us is really important, and have a very high diversity in the department. Now, what were the particular challenge that we were facing? First of all, we have a design critique-based education. So essentially, kind of the idea is that everything evolves around a rapid iteration cycle, so design thinking approach. So we need to bring the students in close proximity, really, in order to kind of exchange ideas of what they're doing and how things are working. And kind of if you ever watched any of these shows like Project Runway, or kind of one thing that's very big here right now is the English speaking show. Essentially, kind of this sure-read idea where people talk about what they did and kind of exchange idea and try to become better as they go along. And that really was a bit of a challenge to move into a COVID environment, or it still kind of is a challenge into a COVID environment. We have a substantial lab infrastructure that sort of was one of the challenges that we had to face. We became sort of, one of our niches is really motion capture. So we have 3 motion capture systems. One of them is fairly large. We have 2 additional ones. There are 2 passive ones, 1 active one. And that is really something that's really difficult to do remotely. We managed to somehow pull that off, but it was almost impossible to really do that in a remote way. We have a very high need for a technological support infrastructure. We have design students. Those are not computer science students. So essentially, when they have the technology at home, they know how to use particular pieces of software, but they are usually not particularly good in fixing any technical problems that they have or they might face on their personal machine. So that is actually an issue. We have the co-op system, which once again, fortunately, is not as much of an issue for us as it is for many others. Kind of there are many fields that are based when they are based on sort of internship-based education. Many areas that struggle immensely, the entire engineering field or kind of the business environment, essentially where there are a lot of jobs just not existing right now. So the students have a hard time getting those internships. In our case, fortunately, we're living in sort of in a so okay environment because there is actually quite a bit happening in the digital media space that offsets any losses that we might have from other areas. So those essentially were the main challenges. Just a couple of images of sort of kind of to give you a little bit of a context, essentially in terms of what we needed to move online, kind of lab spaces like a motion capture lab, immersive media labs, which also houses a segment motion capture space. Now, fortunately, we already had some activities in terms of online education, and that is actually something that was very interesting because we came from a completely different angle. One of the things that happened in our program is that many of the fields that we need to teach, we need specialists that simply did not exist in the Philadelphia area. So we could not find anybody in close proximity to teach those. And in close proximity, I mean sort of in a distance where somebody could easily commute for a lecture and go back home or back where they work. So what we decided to do a couple of years ago is we decided to integrate teachers from other parts of the country, and this is an example of a lecture that is actually kind of just an inverse of an online lecture where the teacher is zooming in, is from an online education. In this particular case, it was an advanced Houdini class, which was taught by a special effects supervisor from Industrial Light and Magic, and essentially having that environment allowed us to really kind of bring these people in, and that really helped us in a COVID environment because for some reason, and that was a lucky coincidence, I guess, we had quite a few of those classes with the remote instructors scheduled for the spring term. So when we moved everything online, essentially moving the students online in addition to the teacher who was already online, was actually a fairly straightforward way to do. Now, this sounds easy to do, but it actually isn't, because you need to set up an infrastructure where essentially the students can access all the technology that we have on campus. So we essentially what we did is we created a turnkey solution that's almost like it's almost like a TV station on wheels, really, that we can move around, and then essentially every student gets connected, and essentially it becomes this huge system where the teacher can see each student's computer, can interact with each student individually, but essentially the teacher can be in a completely different part of the world, and the students can be on campus or not, depending on where they are. So we already had that really helped quite a bit. And from that, essentially, we started to realize that, and that's essentially the way I spun it to our faculty. Really, kind of, we need to think of this really as an opportunity rather than sort of a challenge. Because what's once again what we're really seeing is just an acceleration of certain developments that have already started to take place before COVID happened, and they just kind of made things a lot more. They allowed the future to come quicker, if you like. And one of these things really is this virtualization of technological infrastructure. And we had actually experienced with something that's called Shadow Tech. I don't know if any of you know that. It's a French company who essentially appeared on the North American market about 2 years ago. And what they essentially provide is they provide a gaming PC in the cloud. And that is actually kind of turns out to be very usable. So essentially the latency is at a level that is okay for gaming, and it's certainly at a level that is okay for game development. So with technologies like that, it allows us to really kind of put the entire development effort into the cloud and have all the students constantly having access to the latest technological infrastructure. Regardless where they are, regardless what system, what technology they use, and kind of we sort of expected that would happen, but what really has happened over the last couple of months is that many of the large-scale content developers started to really adopt that. We essentially had somebody from Warner Brothers tell us that essentially about 2/3 of their entire development workforce is now connected to Warner Brothers through a virtualized cloud-based development platform, because they essentially cannot put more than 1/3 of the original workforce into the buildings because of the COVID restrictions, but they still need to be fully active. So these companies are now moving to a virtualized platform, and essentially kind of what it really did is it enabled us for us to do the same. So we essentially kind of need to look into that and kind of make that more accessible. So students no longer need to really use the labs in our building. They can actually kind of use them on their own computer, essentially in the cloud, and access it that way. This allows us to have a much deeper integration with industry professionals, because now we are suddenly no longer restricted to the geography. It's no longer needed for us to have somebody in the Philadelphia area. That person can literally be anywhere. And that person can teach some classes that are on campus, or classes that are online, or classes that are somewhere in between, like the famous HyFlex model, right? So where you have online and on-site students simultaneously. So it allows us to have a very high amount of flexibility. And it also kind of allows us to have the same level of flexibility with our internship positions. They actually, we started to introduce systems that allow students to be on internships throughout the entire program. So essentially they have these co-op internships, which are full-time positions for 18 months. And in between, they can actually go, we have a program that's called Drexel in LA. We have, unfortunately, the problem that most of our industry is on the West Coast and we are on the East Coast. So we have sort of a kind of an outpost on the West Coast, where students essentially go and work with companies and take classes from the West Coast. So it is actually possible now that students are continuously integrated into the gaming industry, while they're at the same time completing and I need to point it out, a research-based degree at the Research One University. So that is actually one of the things that I'm particularly excited about, to really kind of get that deep integration into the industry. So moving forward, so what we are essentially doing, I'm currently in the process of flipping the entire department, and the idea is that we are essentially doing the same thing that we would normally do for flipping or inverting, depending on which side of the Atlantic you are at. They use different terms for that. But what we're essentially doing is, instead of flipping a course, we are flipping the entire department. That means we are separating the things that need to be on campus from those things that don't need to be on campus. And that essentially means that we are probably going to minimize face-to-face lectures. I don't think there are going to be any face-to-face lectures anymore in the near future, but we are focusing on this design-based, design critique-based educational part that allows us to really optimize the use of on-campus resources for experiential learning. So we are turning the entire educational experience into an actual experience. That's sort of the idea. We are moving as much actual development into the cloud as possible. And the final thing is we also need to give students, and that's one of the things that we're kind of trying to currently figure out how to do, access to certain technology at home. So what we did this year is that we sent virtual reality sets to each and every student that is in the virtual reality program. And we started to look into, because there are certain technologies where students can actually get full body motion capture suits for a very reasonable amount of money. And we are kind of looking into that possibility as well, so that every student sort of has his or her motion capture lab in their own living room. And that sort of are really exciting things which really will kind of shift the way we see education in the future. And I took more time than I thought I would, but thanks for the intention. If you have any questions, just drop me a note. Thank you.